Okay, I'd like to invite our panelists up to the stage. Our first session is AI in Construction, Disruption or Dud. Our moderator will be Nora Swanson, who is the Director of Innovation at JB&B.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I guess before we get started, let me just have us go down the line here so I can introduce the wonderful panelists next to me. As was stated, I am Nora Swanson, Director of Innovation and Knowledge Management at JB&B.
Yes, I'm Shane Berger. I'm a principal and our global leader for technical innovation at Woods Bagot.
I'm Denis Leff. I'm the Director of Digital Engineering at Suffolk Construction.
Rob Otani. I'm Chief Technology Officer at Thornton Tomasetti, and I lead the Queer Studio R&D team.
So we have a hefty topic ahead of us for the next 50 minutes. We probably could do an entire conference on this topic alone, so we'll try to at least lead you on some semblance of an AI journey over the next 30 minutes of panel and then 20 minutes of questions. So first question, or several questions, are really to our audience. How many of you used Google Maps in this past week? Pretty much everyone. What about opening your Amazon app and seeing products that may be suggested for you? Good number of people. What about in writing a text message or an email and seeing predictive text show up? Yeah. And streaming services, Netflix, seeing that curated list of suggested for you shows or movies. Yeah. So practically everyone in this room uses AI a lot. So we just wanted to make sure that you understood how much we interact with AI on a day-to-day basis. But we're here to talk about how we can use it in our industry. Before we get started, I just wanted to ask our panelists a potentially very loaded question. How do you define AI?
I think the hard part about that one is the second word of that is intelligence. I feel like philosophy and science have been redefining intelligence for centuries now. The way that when I've presented on AI before, I refer to it generally as the ability to learn and adapt, to be able to answer questions and fulfill particular goals for the intelligence side of that. But it's also in an ever-changing context. So it's not just that you're repeating it in this exact same scenario all the time, but if the context keeps changing, you're talking to different people, you're in a different place, in a different topic, you can keep changing along with that. That's an important part, learn and adapt in changing context. But then the second part of this, the artificial section of it, it's the ability to basically train a software or machine to do those types of things. But what I think is really important about it is that it need not necessarily be human-like. So the way at which it adapts, learns, and solves problems and sets goals may not be the same way that we do it. That's both a potential and a problem.
It's a good question, and it's one I struggled with early on in my AI journey. About 4 years ago, I was very dismissive of AI. I thought this is just a kind of a gimmick. I saw it was not going away in the news. I decided to explore it further. By the way, I also do some software development and things like that, so I get in really kind of technical on this. One minute. It's incredible. What I've learned is that AI actually does, in fact, it mimics the human brain in a way, at least the outcomes do, very frequently. And when you think about the human, when we look at our own minds, we have a limited amount of memory in our heads. We have a limited amount of processing power, but AI's brain is effectively a computer. So you have unlimited ability to expand the memory and the processing power. So all the knowledge that we've acquired in our lifetime is what we operate on a day-to-day basis. When, for example, and the second part of this is we have 5 inputs. We have eyes, ears, scent, taste, touch, right? And when we experience life, we pair it with our previous knowledge, and that's how we make decisions and so on. We have priorities. But an AI has a lot more sensory input because it's a machine. You know, you could attach a pH sensor to it. I don't have a pH sensor. You could attach a temperature sensor. I have a temperature sensor, we all do, but all it can recognize is freezing cold, cold, hot, and burning hot. You know, the AI has a much more refined ability in that spectrum to recognize the data. Same with our vision. We have a certain spectral zone. It can see into infrared and all over. So it can make more decisions. So with our senses, you know, we hear some disturbing noises over there. Over here, we smell some nice baked chocolate chip cookies, and we naturally go to the chocolate chip cookies. Then we see a large cookie and a small cookie, and I want the large cookie because I want a large cookie. But then I see the calories in the small cookie are, you know, 1,000 calories per bite. I reconsider it because at my age, you know, I'm not supposed to eat that stuff, the fats, the sugars, the salts. So that's knowledge that I acquired over time, and I don't buy the cookies, and I go outside and I make a ruckus. But coming in right after me are some college students who just had a huge lunch, and now they're scarfing down 4 cookies at a time, right? But their experiences and where they are is different than mine. And that's how AI works. If you took those college kids' AI programming and put it into me right now, I would make very different decisions. And I would wind up very unhealthy and probably hurt myself in a very short period of time because they take on more risk. So when we build AIs, we have to train it around data sets that works within our organizations. So at the end of the day, with its ability to process all this data, you know, it may sound like a Star Wars figure, like C-3PO, right? And that's the type of thing that I think anybody in this room would love to have as their sidekick throughout the day, whether it's for, you know, home or making decisions at work.
Yeah, there's a lot there, but I try to, part of my job as CTO at Thornton Tomasetti is to convince people what it is first so that they can start leveraging the technology, because there are things that it can potentially do that is bad or is wrong. So, but if you know exactly what's behind the curtain, essentially, you know, you can start to leverage that technology. So I use the definition of, I think of it as embedded intelligence, using artificial training on real data. That's sort of what I use, because it is real data. It just, the artificial part is the training part, which is why I don't even like the term artificial intelligence, because it's real intelligence. It just happens to be artificially trained.
Lovely. All right. Our audience is probably in varying stages of AI journeys within their companies, from some of you maybe not knowing what to do with it, to others using AI tools day to day. For the 3 of you, how did you get started on your firm's AI journeys?
Maybe I'll start off here. So actually, I started in 2015. In 2013, 14, I was hearing about big data. You would hear that at tech conferences, and everyone's like, what is big data? What does that have to do with, you know? Of course, the tech companies knew exactly what that was about. If you can extract the smart bits of big data and train models on those smart bits, you would eventually have something that was very smart that you can leverage. So in about 2015, I was lucky to have one of my developers' wives was a data scientist. And of course, he knew at least part of what she knew anyway at that time. And he explained to me that, you can just take some solved problems, solve solutions, use AI to train train that set of data, and then you just be able to query it, input, output. You get the answer, like instantaneously. And I was thinking to myself, isn't that what we do as humans, like over time, over many, many years? So if we can do that with the intelligence of the company, or at least individual engineers, or the group of engineers, it becomes a very powerful tool. So that's when we started to leverage that technology and start playing around with it.
It's interesting. I was actually, as you were talking, I realized that one of the first times I actually encountered AI in a useful capacity was actually at one of the conferences that you ran. So Rob runs a conference, a AEC Tech conference every year, and I don't remember what year it was, but this is around the same time people were using GANs and other kinds of technologies. I don't need to explain the acronym because I'm not going to go into any detail on it, but using these technologies to like simulate floor plans and facades and little details, kind of a precursor to what a lot of people do now when they type in a prompt and say, make me something look like this. It was trying to create all these different floor plans, except floor plans never worked. They just looked like floor plans and they were interesting that way, but they were non-functional. So I was kind of like, okay, this is boring. This is just like some academic stuff I'm not so interested in. And then you had somebody speak at your conference who had been training using synthetic data, environmental performance, specifically CFD, and training an algorithm to learn on that in order to, because CFD is so computation fluid dynamics for airflow is a computationally expensive task. It takes a lot of processing power to run all the different variations necessary, all the different conditions, especially more complex geometry, especially at an urban scale. It takes a lot of processing power. We used to let this stuff run overnight or for weekends to do it on high-end computers. It's even harder to do now for bigger simulations. But what he had done is he had trained this machine learning algorithm on a whole bunch of simulations of just random bits of geometry and shapes of things. And what it was able to do was to get about 90% there instantaneously. And at that moment, I thought, well, hold on. This is actually shortcutting that entire process. It would take a whole lot of computation power, a whole lot of energy. I mean, it's not lost on us, I think, that we're at a urban green conference talking about a technology that's incredibly energy and water intensive. But this was bypassing that entire process and say, no, you don't have to do all those simulations manually and take up all the processing power to get to a high performance outcome. You can then train this so that it can give you an answer right away using some of the same machine learning technologies that we see now. So it's the first one at that conference when I saw this presented, someone building a tool around that I thought, there's actually a really beautiful functional thing here where if I can get quicker answers while designing how well my design is going to perform so that I can get rid of 90% of the bad ideas right at the beginning and invest all my time and energy on high-performing designs and optimizing them, then I can make a significant impact on how the designs we do impact the environment. So there's been lots of other journeys around knowledge bots and things like that since then, but it was one of the first moments that a light bulb went off in my head and I said, this is actually something that could really benefit and change the way that we think, which is to bring evidence-based design very early on in the design process.
At Suffolk, what was the question again?
How did you get started on your AI journey?
How did we get started on the AI journey? So 7 or 8 years ago, we started developing what's called a data lake. And I'm not sure we had AI in mind at the time. But we started collecting data in a highly structured manner. Every transaction that occurred, whether that transaction happened to be a safety concern or financials or schedule updates, RFIs. And typically these transactions occur in lots of different platforms that we use, different softwares. But we funneled them all into the data lake so that they're all housed in one location so we can run queries between these otherwise disparate databases to draw deeper conclusions. And that alone in itself is extremely valuable. But I think the AI came around 4 years later and we discovered, wow, we have 500 million data entries that this AI can now study, interpret, and give us deeper insights that we could ever imagine. Because it's out there going, looking for its own pattern recognition and saying, hey, by the way, did you know this? Did you know this? There's a correlation with this data and that data. And it's really begun helping us manage our company. So, you know, my recommendation for anyone starting an AI journey, it has to be trained. You can't just pull it off the shelf. But if you start organizing your data, that's a very critical element to success.
You all kind of touched on this in your last answers, but really how are you using AI in your day-to-day, if you are? What tools exist out there in the industry that are real, that are usable? Is it still too early? Are we still kind of in the learning phase? What are you seeing?
I have to say that when I've looked at what's been available so I'm here as the architect on the stage. In architecture, I think probably the most common uses that people have been talking about lately have been more about image creation, about ideation, early concept design. And yes, we're definitely using those kinds of things, but also very much talking about its limitations. I know we had talked about this, we may get to this later, discussions about limitations and governance and best practices and stuff. I would say though, in my own use, the thing that's really stood out for me is access to knowledge. So I'm a heavy note taker. I do everything digitally, and I use a particular application which then allows me to put almost chat bots on top of it to find things for me. So what I'm able to do is I'm able to then find collections of information from notes and books I've read and articles and meetings I've attended that have been in related topics to surface that information for me. And I think this is actually something that, this one's pretty early days. I will tell you it breaks a lot, but this is something I think all of us are going to be encountering on a much more regular basis, is this idea of a bot as an assistant to find things for you, to connect things for you, to look through and provide insight and context to the things that you do. I'm leaning into it because I'm really interested in what it does from an architecture perspective, that while you're designing, can it provide information about low carbon alternative material to a particular thing that I've specified in my project? Can it surface this kind of information to me? Can it say, you know, last 3 projects you did it like this? Not saying this is necessarily like Microsoft Clippy sticking in the corner, but it is kind of Microsoft Clippy. But it's like, in a way, it's, you know, maybe it's the second coming of Clippy, but it's like, it's a version of that that is actually really useful, knows who you are, what you were aware of, and it knows the context of the project. So I'd say the thing that's been the most impactful for me is just seeing the very beginning phases of what that actually means and what it can do for you. And I think a lot of us can get our heads into that sort of space. There are some other tools. We're using things like upcodes for code review. Lots of little plugins now have AI enhancements to them. And we're using little bits of those. But I really think the one that's going to get under the hood for us and really permeate our company is the more access to knowledge side of that. Because we're a 1,000-person company with 15 offices. So half the time we don't know what people have done halfway around the world, but we'd love to learn from it.
At Suffolk, and we're a construction company, and you know about this data lake, one of my favorite uses of AI that we now use day to day is actually revolves around safety. A project has many different stages of construction, right? We have demolition, foundation, superstructure, enclosure, fit out. They all come with different risks. The people on site, it's always, you have new journeymen, you have experienced people, you have people who are new, you know, experienced but new to this particular job site. You have weather, you have different stressors, you know, are we behind schedule, on budget? Everybody experiences, there's a culmination of factors that ultimately lead to incidents. And AI is able to read into the data lake from the past and compare it to how each of our projects exists in its current state today, and give us a daily report on whether we are expecting an incident to happen. And a good thing about AI is it shouldn't just tell you you're going to have an accident today. Really, it should tell you why it thinks that the conditions on your site are dangerous. It'll give you a report so that the on-site personnel can act on it and prevent the stars from aligning across all these variables to a negative outcome, right? So we can take preventative measures before they occur.
Yeah, we, as I mentioned, we started in 2015, so we took a big leap, and we actually started building a lot of machine learning models specifically for structures, and around that time. And in actually 2018, we released an application called Asterisk, and Asterisk was, we called it Asterisk because we would explain to engineers, well, it doesn't do that. Above Asterisk, it doesn't do that, but it was able to design, or is, I should say, still active, is able to design a tall building in like under a minute. So the problem with it was back then, this was 2018, right? Engineers are very skeptical to start with. If they didn't have their fingers in that sauce, they're not gonna trust the recipe. So, it was very black box, extremely black box. And we thought that was the cool part of it, right, from the developer side. But it's not very cool if you're an engineer and dealing with life safety issues. So we've changed completely of how we build these models. They're very, very transparent, and including giving people access to the data sets that we generate. It was also I would say too fast, too soon. So we said, here's the building, designs it in 3 minutes or under a minute. And that was too soon, I would say, back then. So, and also it was high-rise buildings. So yes, we design high-rise buildings, but it's only a small percentage of what we do as a company. So that was probably a mistake from a product side. It was designing something but it was cool. And so we learned a lot from that. So that's how we started. And I think we're getting a lot, what Shane was mentioning about was the knowledge issues. I think that's huge. We started to prototype, at least at first, like OpenAI API, to point to our intranet information, which was already structured. We had a data knowledge team, actually. And that's amazing, actually. Like, the fact that it can, in theory, read through millions of documents in seconds and give you at least a search answer or a chat function is amazing. So it's kind of like a ChatGPT for your internal resources.
Yeah, we're seeing the same things with it being personal data assistants, knowledge managers. Still very much in the infancy, at least that I've seen on the design side of what we do. But Shane, you mentioned this before with all of the add-ins or programs that we use, all of a sudden having AI slapped next to them or having an AI function rolled out. It's almost as if the term is starting to lose its meaning because it's being overused with companies feeling like they need to keep up. What are some questions that we should all be asking these companies who are coming to us with AI solutions or rolling out AI features within their tools?
I think the first one is if the web address is .ai, does not necessarily mean it has AI in the tool, because then anybody can buy those. But I think the key thing for me kind of goes back to the definition that I mentioned, which is the word learn and adapt is a key part of it. If it's not able to learn and adapt, it's not intelligence. It's just, this doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. It could be some amazing algorithm that solves things for you. That doesn't, an AI is not, it shouldn't be a hammer that's looking around for every single nail that's around for you. Like you should select it because it's suiting the particular needs that you have. But if it's not learning or adapting, it's not going to be an AI. It needs to have been trained in some sort of capacity. So machine learning models are trained on large data sets. So a key part of this, and this actually goes back to something I think both of you said, has to do with what it actually has it been trained on. So we're talking with a company that does a lot of prefab and things around carbon circularity for a few projects that we've been working on. However, their data set has been trained specifically out of Singapore and a few other different countries countries, so it doesn't necessarily apply to the same needs that we might have in a market like New York City, or our company also operates in Australia or in London. So knowing, has it been trained on information that's actually relevant to the context that you're looking for? Maybe it just hasn't gotten there yet. That's one part of it. I think it's also important to know how they've necessarily trained it. There's all sorts of questions around risk and ethics associated with how we've been training models, and the kind of information that feeds into these models. Obviously, probably the most clear examples of bias have shown up over the last number of years, specifically around image creation tools. And I think recognizing that training puts a limit on what it's able to do. So from like a design perspective, if it's trained like a lot of the image creation tools are for architecture, it's trained on Western, design culture, mostly by white men, which means you're going to be limited to a very particular subset of opportunities and capabilities, and it will stop you creatively after that point. So for me, I think it's a real key thing is to just understand what it's been trained on, how have they been using that training model to then affect the things that you do. The other thing I would think about, and this is to put my another side of my risk hat on, is will they be training off your data and the information you put into these systems? Because as a company or as any sort of business, you have IP you want to protect in some ways, or you may want to be much more open about it. But making a conscious choice about what you are contributing in that model and how it assists others out there in the market is another key part. There's plenty more things, but I'll let others cover too.
Yeah, and to kind of springboard off of that, I mean, everything you said is exactly my sentiment. But when dealing with AI, you really, as an end user, even though it's so complex and it does all this like abstract thinking and condenses it into an answer, we as end users need to understand exactly how it got there. You have to know what the AI is doing. You can't just take it for the answer that it's outputting, right? Because there's human lives at stake when it comes to design elements. But it's also, if it's projecting some financials, you wouldn't want to make any decisions that are bad for your company. So AI is very complex, but good AI, if you buy a solution or you invent a solution, you always have to keep in mind that there has to be like a record or a trail of understanding. Humans have very complex emotions, right? We have emotions, we make calculations. People may not know how we got there, but as humans, with our intelligence, we can always take the time and explain how we arrived at this conclusion or emotion, and we should expect the same out of our AI systems.
Yeah, in the testing that we've done with the internal chat, as I mentioned, I think a couple of things that came up, which is data privacy. You will now have to be very careful about what you put in your company resources versus what you don't. Confidentiality. If you have signed an NDA at the end of the project, half of the team may not even know that there's an NDA on that particular project, and then it potentially gets out. So I think those are the two issues. But there's also the third issue, particularly instructional engineering, where we essentially, we want people to use these tools, but we also want people to just use it as a guide. You cannot use it professionally as a solved answer. So,
just one quick thing for you guys, and this came up actually in our conversation before. How many of you have read a EULA, an end user license agreement for software? Okay. So what you're going to find in those EULAs, especially if you are a profession that requires licensure, like architecture, engineering, things like that, if they have AI in their tool in any of those, there will be a clause in that says, does not replace your professional responsibility, okay? You cannot say, the AI told me that as an answer to the question, right? That is not an adequate answer. And to what you said before, you can't explain that to the communities that you're working with either. You as the human need to be able to, you have to have explainability. So back what Robert said before, this is a bit of the problem with AIs that are a black box. If you have no way to verify how it came up with an answer, you can't explain it to the people for a code review, and you can't explain it to your communities that you were trying to serve and work with, how you came up with the answer that you came up with. So I think a really key thing to watch out for any of these tools is how explainable and understandable its outputs are, and how you can use those in the narrative when you're working with your communities.
Given that data privacy and governance and security are at the forefront of many of these AI conversations, what are your companies doing in regards to rules and regulations surrounding AI usage? Are you starting to see any contracts come in with language regarding AI usage? I know Shane just touched upon the end user agreement, but on the designer construction side, are we seeing anything in the contracts yet?
I've heard of certain contracts that have, basically forbid the use of AI. Although, as you saw, like the vast majority of this audience here has touched AI. So I think that's an impossibility, to be honest. And you can't, which is, but we have heard about that. And internally, we have an AI guiding principles document for the firm. It's going to change, 100 times over the next, year or two. Who knows? But we do have something. It's basically what we've been just discussing. Check the sources, independently check what AI has told you, and just be, diligent about, sort of the answers that it's giving you, because it could be wrong.
Two things I guess that come to mind for me on that is, one is we've seen inklings of things in contracts. I was talking about this with you a bit before, clauses in contracts that have left open the door for clients or third parties to use what we've produced for other things. Normally, as an architect, when we sign a contract, it's the drawings document, scheduled specifications are for the use of this project, right? However, there's some room being left open where others are trying to take advantage of that information to train their own models to basically replicate some of the processes that we do. At the same time, we'd also like to train our own models to learn from our experiences. Back to that whole knowledge thing. It's not just what you've written down, but it's the designs you've created, it's the models you put together, the drawings, the images, all that type of stuff. And then the third level, city organizations and other groups throughout the urban environment are going to want to have some connection to the data and the material that we work with. I think we're going to have to get to a point where there's some level of comfort that people will own the IP and the knowledge that they have, but give access to others to train these systems, ultimately for a greater good of creating, much more productive and efficient and sustainable environment. So that's going to be absolutely a key part of that. The other part I would say is that a lot of our conversations around limitations and guidance around AI mostly have to do with it from a design perspective, early phases. Certain really basic rules, like we will never use the name of another designer or architect in our prompts. That's just ethically, we do not think that is appropriate. But also a lot of it has mostly to do with a lack of maturity. Here's this new tool, this new shiny toy you want to play with, and we haven't really learned what the right way of infusing that into a mature design thinking process is. And I think any of your organizations that are using it for design are going to get that level of maturity. So to what Robert said, these rules are going to change over time as we get more comfortable with them. But we're trying to guide people with what we think is the right way forward internally to take advantage of them, but also help them avoid some of the pitfalls.
We are at time for questions, and I actually have a whole list here. Many of the questions revolve around the promise or potential of AI to reduce the mundane tasks that some of us don't like to do, allowing us to focus on higher value work. What, in your opinion, is that higher value work or offering that we bring to the table? And what does it mean for people whose job it is to maybe do some of what some of us might consider to be more mundane tasks?
Well, there's no question that machine learning and AI will start to automate, in particular the lower level mundane tasks. But I've been telling people, that's been happening over many years, not just AI related, just technology in general. I mean, I give the example, when I was a kid, I used to trim the grass with a hand trimmer, literally on my hands and knees. And now there's, a weed whacker, the weed whacker. Even I have a robotic lawnmower, so it's replaced the landscaper to some extent. Right, and that would be me actually on a weekend. So there's no question it's going to replace some of those things, but I would argue also that also is an architect or an engineer or construction manager with a master's degree doing some of these mundane things is it the best use of their time? I don't think so. And so the fact that I can hire an engineer to design all of the beams and columns of a 100-story building means that probably AI can do that. And it's very repetitive, right? It's like they're not actually using their brain a whole lot by doing that. So maybe the first 100 times is educational. After that, it's just a bore, So I think that's where AI, at least initially, is going to come into play.
I mean, what you were talking about is we've been extending our brains for such a long time. We've been using external tools to take our cognition, put it into something else so that we can do something else, whether my note-taking tool I mentioned before, or using your phone in particular ways. We've been doing this for a super long time. I think the key thing is, there's two things that stand out for me about this. One is, I have a bit of worry about when AI comes in and hijacks a whole bunch of those processes, we end up with this sort of cognitive de-skilling. We're losing the learning process that were necessary to then achieve those higher level goals. So if we want to get to these higher level goals, what was necessary to learn to get up to that point? I learned architectural detailing to a person who did hand drafting. I ended up going all the way into full model-based stuff, but it's like that was important to my thinking process, was learning through that. So I think one thing we need to be careful about is, are any of these quote-unquote lower-level things actually important to get up to that higher-level task and to understand the bigger picture tasks? Because ultimately, we're really good at connecting together multiple upper-level tasks, abstractly, conceptually, whatever. Like, that's what our brains are really well-suited to do. I think the second thing that kind of stands out for me about this, though, is that we should be perfectly happy to let an automation routine, AI or whatever, take over a lot of menial automated tasks if it allows us to bring much more empathy into our design process, what we as humans are really good at, which is understanding what other people are thinking and what their experiences are. So if by removing some of those automated tasks, some of those repetitive things that everybody has to do, nobody likes doing lots of door schedules, right? But if you can feed that into a system so that you can spend more time talking with your clients, talking with your communities, working through design schemes that are a much more empathetic response to what the experience of their design would be, then I think we're in a much better place.
I've always been concerned of when you have AI do something for you, again, the de-skilling of the workforce. If you use ChatGPT for, let's say, programming, you can literally say, please give me code that does X, Y, and Z, and it will just print it out. And you can copy, paste, and execute it, and it will most likely work just fine in a lot of cases. But you didn't learn anything. You're not going to improve yourself to make a more complicated program in the future. So the same way that it has the risk to make us less intelligent, it also has the skill set to make us even more intelligent. We always have to look again at what it's giving us and understand the problem that it solved that we were unable to solve because we just weren't smart enough. It'll explain the logic, and you learn from it and make it your own, part of your own knowledge to work with on future problems.
Yeah, so I agree with Shane about potentially losing something along the way in terms of learning various aspects of design or whether it may be. But I will say there's some advantages too. It gets you to answers really fast, and it can even, like, for instance, I asked it the other day because I had to calculate my loan payments over the next 5 years for my stock purchases. But and I asked ChatGPT to do that, and it was pretty cool because it actually wrote some Python code in the background and gave me an Excel spreadsheet of the first 5 years of that loan, potentially. The nice thing is I can go into that Python code and know exactly the logic that it used. And so that's something that was much faster that I would get to than I would have otherwise. So, and I'm not and I know enough about Python to at least read the logic, but now I know how to write Python code for that specific thing, and I can build. It will, by the way, that function will likely be available in Excel pretty soon too, in the Excel Copilot. You just ask Excel to do that for you, and it'll create it for you.
That was leading into, actually perfectly led into the next question. There were several questions regarding what chatbots exactly, specifically we're using. Really, your comment about note-taking really spoke to a lot of people. I know on our end, we're using Microsoft Copilot for a lot of this work. We are also building our own AI chatbots, which at least for us, does require a dedicated team with specific knowledge to be able to build that and train those agents on that material. I'm not sure what specific tools you all are using.
I mean, when we start building our first chatbot about a year or so ago, it was the OpenAI is what we used for it. And then we've been playing around with Microsoft Copilot. That's the most common one, I think, in our practice, partially because we have a big Microsoft contract, so everybody has access to it. But it's the default one we've been looking at. I will say, though, the one that I've been playing around with my note-taking tool is Claude. And that's the one by Anthropic, which is a competitor to OpenAI. And the reason why I got interested in it is I was reading about what almost seemed like the different personalities that they seem to have. It really depends, again, back to what have they been trained on. And Claude was trained a lot more on academic papers and different types of books and pieces that, therefore, its tone, the way that it responds, the types of language it uses, because part of the reinforcement learning, the way that it learns how to talk to you, is when it comes up with an output, when they're training, they say, no, I want you to respond in this kind of language, this kind of way. Not change the facts, but follow with full sentences. Don't put any jokes in, or don't do these types of things, right? And I actually tend to like the way that Claude responds, and that's the one I've been interested in. A little bit less easier to use than maybe an OpenAI and some other ones, which have different bots on top of, or different apps on top of it. But I think, to that point, you're gonna find lots of different versions that are out there, and I think just reading them, or how they've been trained on a little bit, or getting a sense of it, but honestly just trying it. Spend, off and on a week or so trying it out. Does it feel like it's giving you the kind of answers that you want? And is it giving you the type of responses? Does it work for what you're looking for? I think over the next few years, we're gonna find a lot of options.
I wish I could recall the name of this website right now, but as we were evaluating which model to use for our data, we came across a site that listed every large language model out there, or I shouldn't say every, most. And there were, I think at the time, 652,000 large language models that you could use to train your AI bot. So knowing what you're pulling down and using is critical. I mean, even hopefully you're aware, if not, ChatGPT, their 3.5 model is only trained on data through October of 2023, I think, and their 4.0 model is only trained on data through, what year are we in? I don't even remember. 24, whatever it is.
More recent.
It was like a year and a half versus 6 months ago. Anyway, the data is not recent, so we cannot ask, OpenAI, ChatGPT, what happened yesterday. So just things to keep in mind as you're considering what large language model you're going to use.
One other quick thing to add on this is that some of these are foundational models. They're the basics of understanding language and knowledge. Then on top of that, you have companies that have built things, on example being Upcodes. Like Upcodes did not teach it to speak English or write English. They got that from a foundational model, and then they put their own data on top of it. Sometimes that's referred to as a RAG, or retrieval augmented generation. So it's basically speaks the basic language, knows how to do response, and then it says, all right, here's a whole bunch of documents on a particular topic, and I want you to know that topic really well, and all your answers have to fit within the answers of that topic. So that's the other thing complicates this a bit differently, is that you will find products out there that have been trained over particular subsets of topics, but that's also an opportunity for your own practices. You could use a foundational model like an OpenAI or Claude or any of those out there and build your own RAGs or something on top of it. They give you opportunities to do that. And we're looking right now at feeding in a bunch of our knowledge resources to do exactly that same type of thing. So we didn't have to teach it to speak English, but we did need to point it in the direction of these are all our technical documentations, and we'd like to answer for those.
The other thing just to keep in mind when choosing what foundational model to use is each also has a different cost associated with it. So the amount of information you pull down from particular models has a value associated with it, and then the amount of information that you then push up to those models has a certain value as well. Additionally, every inquiry that anyone makes within your company often will cost money as well. I mean, it's fractions of cents on the dollar, but still just something to keep in mind that it's not free. We have about 5 minutes left, so considering we are at an Urban Green event, are there particular use cases for AI in building decarbonization? And I suppose a follow-up question, is there a point where the computing power associated with AI actually leads to increases in carbon emissions versus savings?
Well, to answer the first part of that, at least that question, that application that I mentioned, Asterisk, in 2018, we actually were computing embodied energy, which is not really used that much anymore, but at the time it was sort of like EC, EE, embodied carbon or embodied energy. So that's what we decided to use then. So that's that. So, you know, again, think about the power of that. You were getting the sort of, embodied energy or / carbon, almost instantaneously for that particular typology. Recently, we trained a model on energy modeling, so getting energy usage, not 100% accurate, but with enough sort of inputs and outputs that you can start to, figure out which options are better or worse when it comes to building design and envelopes. We're still finding that sort of those use cases and then working backwards on what data we actually need to do that.
I've seen quite a few examples of AI-based tools in our industry that do a really good job at making it a very fast way to create things that are very bad for our environment. Like, it's again and again, there are tools out there, I'm not going to name any, but absolutely do this. And it's very frustrating when I see that, because not only they're using already a very energy-intensive extractive technology, but then they're using it to just rapidly create the same things we've been creating for the last few decades, which just makes it faster to fill up our world with those types of items. I think one of the things that at one point, that's something that definitely worries me, and we need to make a conscious choice as users of these types of systems to not go that direction, to do something different. The sort of opportunities that I do get a bit excited by, though, is, I mentioned a little bit of this before, the ability to speed up certain kinds of calculations to get rid of a lot of the bad ideas. So again, if I can run a CFD analysis or energy analysis or whatever on a particular set of designs and move very quickly into a better solution of design, then I've moved it further down the road to be able to create something that's better performing for the environment. Because every single time I run an AI calculation to do the training data, it is going to be quite extractive from an energy and water perspective. The other side of this I get kind of interested in, and actually the last speaker started prompting some of these things in my head, especially when he was talking about NYC website, was starting to think about the data we have about New York City. The data that we have about particular demographics, building stocks, available buildings, but then getting all the way down into materials and construction and thinking about deconstruction processes and carbon circularity and not just buildings as material banks, but cities as material banks? What is the opportunity for us to be using these kinds of data sets to constantly create a reusable, rejuvenating city that is able to reuse a lot of its materials? So if a building is not sustainable on its own to be able to be reused in that capacity, can we use AI tools to actually track its materials and to do things with it to then ultimately benefit the environment further down the line? I think there are opportunities for that type of thing that do quite excite me, but using it as a way to renew and rejuvenate the materials and the building stock that we have.
You good? All right. We are just about to wrap this up. I suppose to be a little on the nose with the question, AI in AEC, is it a disruptor or is it a dud?
Yes.
No, it's going to be pervasive throughout almost everything that we do, whether we like it or not. And I'm on both sides of the equation. There are some scary things that can be done with AI, and there's also some really good things about AI. And I think it's our jobs to find all the good for business tools that we can develop.
Back in like 2003, I went to a conference in Albany, and it was about BIM, VDC. And back in that time frame, it was a very new thing, and the same question was effectively asked. And one of the audience members raised their hand and made a comment, because I was kind of speaking positively about BIM VDC, and they said, yeah, maybe like in 10 years or something, right? And then it sounds like a long time, but that actually, as we get older, that feels like yesterday, right? It just happens. I think the AI, it will definitely, in 10 years, we're going to be extremely reliant on it. It's going to be running through our business in the construction, the AEC industry. The reality is this AI has been in every other industry for the last 10 years. That's why when you opened up the conversation, Google Maps has been doing it. They didn't invent it 2 years ago.
Google Translate as well.
Google Translate, Walmart, all the marketing materials we get, all the phone calls that, all the marketing based on talking in front of Alexa and then suddenly getting trips to Europe, right? It's always been there. It's just entering our industry now because we have historically been laggards in adoption, and it's going to be a big deal in the next 10 years.
All right, that wraps us up. Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Denis. Thank you, Rob. Thank you.
What a great panel. They're going to take a quick picture over there. Next year, it'll be done by AI. Before you leave the room, we're going to do two quick things. First, again, I want to thank our sponsor, Carrier, for their support to make this conference possible. We have a very, very short 30-second video that we're going to run. Let's run that, and then Colleen is going to give you a couple instructions, and then we're going to head to break.